as a program director.
Hi, so here we are for the next session. And in this session, we are going to be talking about future of innovations in India. But before we talk about that, here's a quick reminder for all of you, especially for the ones who have the full access participants. Please log on to the matchmaking software meetings with fellow participants. The AI-powered matchmaking engine will recommend you suitable attendees to schedule your meetings. Well, here for now, I am handing this over to Balaji.
Hello, everyone. Okay. Gunjan, I'm not on the screen.
Right. Your video is a little bit of a problematic. Can we try your video again? Do you want to?
Could you, is my audio visible or no?
Yeah, we can hear you completely fine. We just can't see you.
Okay, so that's, I think let's not worry about that. Nobody needs to see my face. The panelists are the more important ones. It's a great pleasure to introduce this session. The title of this session is Future of Innovations in India, which is a very appropriate topic for now because during this pandemic time, everybody needs to think and rethink what we have been doing so far. And to lead this panel, we have a good friend of ours at, sitting in as our moderator, Atul, who is the CTO of Manthan. It's a global market leader of SaaS-based analytics. And he himself is very much focused on latest innovations in AI, advanced analytics, and cloud and big data. He is also presently the chair of India's NASSCOM Product Council. And in fact, he got renominated again for this year. Congratulations on that. So 2019 and 2021. And I wish him all the best in his role. I would like to hand it over to Atul now so that he can take over from the program director on to the show. Thank you, Atul.
Great. Thank you, Balaji. Firstly, I want to welcome everyone to this very exciting panel discussion, Future of Innovations in India. And, just to set some context, as we well know, the scale and diversity and complexity of India, including the entire demographic beyond, just urban, right? Including semi-urban, rural, also our SME sector, the large unorganized sector, and so on and so forth, presents a very humongous challenge, but also opportunities that can be addressed via technology and products, right? So it has, as we know, it has the potential to drive up the economy, make our country a leader across many industries, not only just IT, right? So things like agriculture, manufacturing come to mind. So if you really, if you were to go back 1,000 years, we had estimated 20 to 30% of the world's GDP, was from India, about 1,000 years back. In fact, till a few hundred years back, that number was still very significant. But very honestly, let me ask you, when was the last time India and innovation were mentioned in the same breath, right? But, things are changing very fast. And so what we want to talk about here is, what are the top India innovations for India, right? For what we call Bharat. What can we expect in the next 5 to 10 years? Where are the upcoming entrepreneurs headed? What is our biggest challenges and opportunities as an ecosystem? So to shine a light on sort of this whole holy grail area, I could not have a better panel and, innovators, than we have here. So let me quickly intro them. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Sandeep Maini. Sandeep is the chairman of Maini Group. They're a leader in diverse spaces like plastics, aerospace, electric mobility. Sandeep leads several companies there as part of the group. He's been very active in the industry. Sandeep has been instrumental in transformation of CIN Karnataka. He's been a past chairman of the Karnataka State Council. But very impressive, he's been instrumental in implementation of Karnataka's EV policy, helping the government, and is considered one of the top experts in the EV ecosystem here in India, right? Welcome, Sandeep.
Thank you, Atul. Pleasure. Yeah.
Next up, we have Santanu Bhattacharya, and Santanu is no stranger to many of us. He's the chief data scientist at Airtel. Today, I believe over 400 million subscribers, so amazing scale. In the past, Santanu's led Facebook's emerging markets products, headed America Online's global data analytics products. He's built 2 startups. He's been part of one of the unicorn journeys in India. He's a PhD from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, and he's been a speaker at the World Economic Forum. Welcome, Santanu.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
And last but not least, we have Dale Vaz. So Dale is a friend from Swiggy. He's the CTO. As we know, India's largest on-demand hyperlocal platform and growing very fast. and one that's really been at the forefront of using innovation to serve, not only food delivery, if I may say, but really user experiences, right? And that's what it's about. He's previously been the tech director for Amazon.in. Prior to that, he spent a very long time at Amazon.com in Seattle, leading the international expansion, for retail. So welcome, Dale.
Thank you.
So gentlemen, I think we have a great show. Let's make this very interactive, unstructured, and let's have some fun. So let me start by asking you, we talk about innovation, right? And it's important in India. So I want to ask the panelists, why is it suddenly important, right? Why is it so relevant? And where are we broadly across the, the fabric as a nation in terms of innovation? And what are, from your point of view, what are the large scale opportunities, that could really transform the country, in the next couple of years, and especially in the context of, the pandemic and kind of the new next normal, whatever you call it, right? So let me start with you, Santanu.
Right. Thank you so much. Atul, excellent question, right? And the backdrop you sort of anchored to begin with, which is at one time we were a quarter of global GDPs for over 1,000 years. It sort of dropped. We were one of the most innovative nations in the world. We did surgeries thousands of years back. If you go to Delhi today and look at the metallurgical pillars, no one knows what the constituents were, but thousands of years later, they're still standing there. So if you look around the country, in architecture, in construction, in metallurgy, and if you look at the historical books and the scripts, there are talks about innovations, right? In fact, knowledge, what we call knowledge economy today, was essentially immortalized with a statement. I'm trying to remember in which Purana it was or which Veda it was. It's Shadeshe Pujyate Raja Vidyan Sharvatra Pujyate, which means the king is revered in the country. The knowledgeable ones are revered everywhere. With that, today what has happened in the past, I'd say 200 years or so, it's sort of declined in terms of innovation, right? And the revitalization is just about happening in the past 10, 15 years in the country. We declined from, we're about a couple of percentage point and a half in global GDP. As a part of the spend on R&D, it's even lower than most of the countries, right? There are bright spots. For example, our innovation in terms of space, rocketry, and so on. There are a couple of areas, there are very, very bright spots. There are institutions that are sort of leading institution, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, IISc, and so on, leading in different areas of fundamental physics, biochemistry, and so on. But in general, the scene is such that we could improve, we could significantly improve. In the past few years, so going to the second part of your question, saying that what do you think in the post-pandemic world, the innovations will sort of lead towards, right? So one of the things that the post-pandemic world or the pandemic has taught us is that, look, the status quo that we have had for past 50 years, which is a GDP growth that's guaranteed, a sort of standard of living that will continue to grow, are no longer taken for granted. So I expect 3 or 4 areas to sort of like accelerate in terms of in the next 10 years. The first area is my favorite, and I can speak for hours, but I don't think it's that much time, which is everything that's AI. AI-driven innovations in everything from designing drugs, which will be one of the first, the health AI areas, in terms of figuring out the things like language, video, vision translations, making the world more connected one. And you can talk about innumerable areas in AI that will be sort of, it will sort of explode. The second areas is essentially, I think, is the areas of providing what I call as a better lifestyle, using synthetic replacements. What I mean by that, better food, right? Beyond Meats and companies like that are sort of trying to figure out how do I leave a lesser carbon footprint on the planet and still provide food for the people, still provide, proteins, still provide carbohydrates and so on, make people healthier and better. Third one is healthcare by itself. In the context of AI, I talk about healthcare. What I call is a distributed healthcare. Healthcare today, one of the biggest challenges is that you brought up the India, right? You go beyond, I come from a small town in India. It's the state capital, still has a population of 2 lakh, Agartala. You have anything beyond a basic surgery, you still have to fly to Calcutta or Vellore or somewhere else. It's really heartbreaking. Every time farmers who have cancer, simple cancer, will sell all their land, all their livelihood and fly to Vellore and then try to get some treatment. Unless we figure out a way, and especially in India, to what I call as a distribute the healthcare and do it at an affordable cost, and we have been a leader in some areas in India on that, it would become more and more challenging, right? So these are the three areas that I can think of, in my opinion, and I'm sure Sandeep and Dale, who are leaders in their area, have much more ideas.
Thank you, Shantanu. Next, over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Atul. And I think Shantanu has very aptly and briefly summarized it. So without repeating, I'd like to emphasize that clearly one of the points where innovation is a must is healthcare. And as we go ahead with what we've seen in the past and what we are seeing today, I believe that a lot of work is going to be done in that. But, I come from the brick and mortar industry, started as a small entrepreneur many, many years ago. And as we built the industry, there's one thing that's very important that we learned in innovation. And that is that why innovation? And for what are we looking at? And how should India look at this in terms of innovation? And I think one of the most important things is that it must have a larger purpose, a purpose which is beyond commercial implications, a purpose that is helping the society to build some form of abundance and happiness across. And I do believe that what you've seen in India in the last 20 years, where the innovation has not moved to the level it has, is because most innovations have been seen as a key to business growth. And in my opinion, that the moment we start looking at a larger purpose, you will see innovations in India growing multifold. And what do I mean by that? I mean, what is the kind of social impact we want to make? If we look at a large population of ours who are lesser privileged, what are their key problems across smaller villages and smaller towns? And how do we make and think of ideas that can benefit these people? And that's not much thought about. So if you see the space open in India innovation, it's huge. Fortunately, I have to tell you that I've been on the boards of some small startups now in various areas of innovation. And I find that the younger generation is far more tuned to doing things for a larger purpose and a common good. It could be because in general, the financial backing they have, or maybe the financial security they have, is much better than what we had. But the fact remains is that they truly believe that they would like to give their children a better future than we have given our children. And I believe that if India is able to encapsulate this in a single sentence and say, what is it that is going to help us give our future generations a better life, and identify those areas, which could be multiple in nature, we would have something for us to look for, entrepreneurs to look for, and move into that innovation space. So it's a huge blue sky out there. It's up to us to see where we need to seek our opportunities.
Well,
thank you.
Sandeep. Thank you. Dale, over to you.
Yeah, so some great inputs from Sandeep and Shantanu, and having to follow up with them, I think I have to agree with a lot of the points they have said. But I do have a little bit of a twist to what Sandeep said. When we think about, say, economic benefit versus social benefit, for me, it is not so much an either or. I think it is an and. I think true sustainable social benefit can come when you have a good economic case to back it up. And let's explain that a bit. What that means is that if we really want to be able to drive change in India and we want to invest in our massive population and addressing some of the constraints we have, I think we need a lot of funds. We will need a lot of time and effort. And unfortunately, without having great economic case, it's very hard for people to sustain social causes for the sake of social causes. So when I think about the need for innovation or the future of innovation in India, it's really about saying, if we have to solve for the scale of India, and if we have to solve for the constraints that India has, I think we need to build low-cost, high-impact solutions, which means they have to be economically viable, and they need to have an economic case to it, but they also have to have a high impact on society. So you can think about low-cost, high-impact solutions in the space of agriculture, where you are trying to help us increase our agricultural output. You can think about healthcare, as was discussed. You can think about financial inclusion. How do you get people access to banking and financial services? You can think about education. And so there are different ways in which you can think about how do you bring low-cost, high-impact solutions. And for me, the combination of the economic benefit and the social benefit is really where the sweet spot is for India.
Super. Thank you, Dale. And I'm going to come back, gentlemen, to some of the points you made around, tech for good, prosperity for all. I heard healthcare, agriculture, all good things. And obviously, there are some big challenges there. Next, let me jump into, Dale and Santanu, you both come from a, very large scale consumer population, kind of use case set, right? Applying data, AI, emerging tech very broadly, right? To a lot of it is non-urban India, right? Which is what we're also talking here. And then, Sandeep, you come from certain areas which are not very glamorous today, like clean tech, smart batteries, infra. I've had some very interesting discussions with you. I remember a couple of years back, EVs. I think you mentioned autonomous as well. So can you gentlemen talk about what specifically your businesses are doing, that is needle moving innovation, and what could be game changer, for your business, but for the country as well? And if you could just touch upon, what's been some of the progress, impact, whatever you can share, it'll be great. Let's start with you, Dale.
Sure. I think for people in India, many of you would know the brand Swiggy. And a very quick background for people outside of India who may be listening into this discussion. So Swiggy is basically what we believe to be an on-demand delivery platform. What that means is Swiggy is essentially about trying to provide customers access to products and services on demand. And we started out as a food delivery platform in India. And since then, we've gone from being able to deliver food to being able to deliver any kind of product, any kind of service, including, for example, during the lockdown, when we had the COVID lockdown, when schools were closed in India, we were able to use the Swiggy Genie service to deliver textbooks to more than 10,000 students who needed to study at home. Right, so there are different ways in which you can think about that. People were able to use Swiggy to be able to get access to medicines from pharmacies for their parents, or for milk for their kids at home, and of course, food. So there are different ways in which people have essentially used the Swiggy platform to be able to help improve their way of life. And at the heart of it, Swiggy is basically about providing convenience to consumers. And how we do this is we have a three-way marketplace. We have a customer, we have an on-demand for workforce, which is the driver, and we also have the supplier, which could be a restaurant, could be a store, could be a grocery market, so on. And the data and AI that we build is essentially about trying to connect all these three players in this three-way marketplace in a real-time fashion. So when you as a consumer are looking at what you want to be able to buy, your needs are going to be very specific to where you are in India. For example, if you're sitting in Bangalore versus sitting in Hyderabad versus sitting in Delhi, you may have very different needs in terms of what food and what choices, lifestyle choices you have. And what we do with Swiggy is building this extremely hyper-local platform that is optimized to individual cities, individual areas across the country, that is designed to work in a very efficient manner. So today, at least before COVID, we were in 500 different cities across India. We were serving big cities, small towns. We were having more than 200,000 drivers on the fleet who were basically picking up and delivering products from more than 150,000 different restaurants and stores across India. So the ecosystem that Swiggy basically was building was basically being able to connect consumers across different points in India with sources of supply and provide a flexible workforce to the environment. In this case, essentially, with Swiggy, we have drivers who have been able to sign in when they want and get access to the Swiggy delivery platform. We have restaurant partners who are able to increase their revenue stream by being able to partner on the Swiggy platform. So Swiggy is about providing customers access to services and products. At the same time, it's also about trying to see how can we grow the larger ecosystem by connecting different players in the ecosystem and bringing them together in this three-way marketplace.
Yeah, Dale, if I may ask, if you were to point one, very bleeding edge innovation that you're working on that will, take that whole hyper personalization a step further, what would that be?
I think an interesting area we're working on right now is the problem of maps, what we call the last mile maps. So if you think about maps in India, we've got pretty good publicly available solutions for large maps. So if you want to move between point A to point B, we've got, for example, Google that you can use to find your directions in India. But the challenge that we have seen is what we call the last mile, which is the point from when the driver reaches that location to your home. And that's the point where they have reached the gate of your apartment complex, but they have to now reach the apartment itself. Or maybe they have reached the entrance of the mall, and now they have to figure out where in that mall is that restaurant or that store, right? And what we've seen is that in the context of India, it's such a diverse place that the geospatial data is not easily available. So when you think about a driver trying to figure out where to go, they essentially end up walking around the building a few times, trying to understand how can I even enter the building, which should be the access gate for me as a driver. Where should I park my vehicle? How should I go from the parking lot to the customer's location? So we collect all that information today. We have all that geospatial data that we collect from our devices of our drivers. And we are using that geospatial data to build what we call Swiggy Maps. Swiggy Maps is essentially going to be able to help us understand the physical layout of different points within India, malls, office locations, residential complexes, and so on. And then using that, we're going to be able to optimize the logistics of people who want to move from point A to point B. So you can think of this as trying to figure out how do we improve the last mile logistics by trying to squeeze out the inefficiency that today exists when people are trying to spend time figuring out where to go and how to reach destinations. So Swiggy Maps is a pretty interesting area because it also includes problems like understanding addresses, where you have to understand how do you convert an address into a geospatial point, and you can have different ways in which addresses could be represented. You also have to understand geospatial constructs. For example, one-ways. You have to understand working hours, commercial establishments, residential complexes, a whole gamut of challenges that exist in this space. Right. And we're trying to map that out with Swiggy Maps.
Excellent, thank you. Shantanu, moving to you, I know 400 million users, wow, right? If you could talk about a couple of bleeding things. I know you have a lab, that you're working on that are sort of rolled out, and some of the future-looking innovation that will be really interesting.
Absolutely. I was trying to actually jump on what Dale was talking to, right? Atul, when you talk about a bleeding edge, right? I tend to disagree. It has to be India edge. We have been innovating for West Plus sitting in the country, and the West Plus model doesn't work. The addressing issue that Dale very eloquently put, my address, my house in California, the address can only be written in one way. And Google Map will always point out in that location. My house in Bangalore, in 6 government documents, the address is written in 6 different ways. And it will probably put 4 different locations if it ever gets it right? Just those innovations for the country, because the countries are structured in different ways. We grew up in different ways. We write things in different ways. We did and that's actually one of my favorite areas I've been working on for 5 years. It sounds like it's trivial, but if you look at the problem, the complexity of the problem, there's a paper I have a few years back. It's on MIT's Emerging Market website. Just in India, just for solving that addressing issue will raise the GDP by about $12 billion a year, which is 0.5% of the GDP.
Wow.
Sounds small in the Western context, it doesn't exist, but in Indian context, it's huge, or in Indonesia or any emerging market. So I was just ready to jump in when Dale said that. So that's actually one of the bleeding edge innovation that Swiggy is working on, Flipkart is working on, Amazon, Airtel, everyone, right? We all try to solve the same problem. But let's talk about something slightly different. One of the challenges that us and the other telcos have is essentially providing the country with enough connectivity, right? Just before the pandemic, our customers were using 60 petabytes of data every day. And today it's about 110 or so. We have to just double the capacity, about 80% more capacity in a matter of 6 months. So what does that entail? So it entails more towers, right? More towers, right towers in the right place. And so we have essentially covered most of the cities in a decent way. So in Bangalore, yes, there are areas which are spotty, but then it's largely a solved problem. The problem really that you need to go after the rural Indians, because as the people are moving back, so think of the migrant workers who have lived in Bangalore for past 5 years, have had good experience with our network, and now back to Bengal or Eastern UP. And their expectation, and before they moved here, their expectation on the network was if they got anything better than 2G, it made their day. Today, if they get anything less than the 4G-ish experience in their hometown, they will complain, and for the right reason. It's a question of livelihood. It's a question of kids trying to get education online and so on and so forth, right? So how do you roll out so much of the network in such a short time? The towers, right? So what used to happen, it was a manual process. People would go and sales guys would come and say, this is a spotty area. We need to do this. We need to cover this, right? So nationwide, there would be requests for probably somewhere between 1 to 2 lakhs of new towers, which people would manually sit down and spend about, the circle CEOs will spend up to quarter of their time, 15 days every quarter, right? Going through this information, manually looking at Google Map, looking at saying, oh, there are houses around there. So let's take a bet. I think these are manually counting 400 houses, 1,600 population. Yeah, looks like a spot where you can make money. 2 villages next to each other. Massive manual process on a country that has an area of 3 lakh square kilometers. Today, what you've done is looked at the entire country. And the reason makes it even more complex, because in India, the economic indicators outside the big cities are just not available. No one can tell you what's the average per capita income in Purnia, Gaya, or Agartala. No one can tell, right? So how do you build economic prosperity indicators? Because that's important for logistics, that's important for consumer products, goods companies trying to sell to those areas, and 50 other things. So what you've done, you have looked at the entire country from the sky. And we essentially looked at 120 signals, the width of the road. If there's a canal next to the village, does the canal have water or don't have water? Is the land a fallow land or agricultural land? If agricultural land, what is our best guess of the agriculture? 120 signals like that. Build a deep learning method, deep learning algorithm, superimpose NASA's, my former employer's nighttime illumination data. Illumination is an indicator of prosperity. If you can put out a light at night, you probably have enough money to do something, right? And built a highly, highly synthetic index where now the number of towers, the tower planning, what we call it net plan, the network planning is done automatically. I can run it on a bunch of GPUs every day, every 8 hours. Doesn't need to be run 8 hours, but every 8 hours, I can build a synthetic prosperity index of India in a 1 square kilometer basis. That is like extremely impressive. For example, I'll tell you 2 tidbits from there. One, we found out that the deep learning method is telling us if the houses are more rectangularish, the buildings, the area is relatively more prosperous. And you just could not fathom why it would be so until you realize in village areas, the rectangular buildings are bazaars, schools, colleges, warehouses, they're all rectangularish. So the presence of a rectangular building in a rural area indicates a relatively high prosperity. There's no way humanly I could have a priori learned about it.
Yeah.
All these impacts.
Yeah.
And the impacts are huge today. I mean, these impacts are in the tunes of billions of dollars of capex and a better network and a faster network rollout.
That's a great example. Thank you, Santanu. Sandeep, over to you. Some of the areas you work in are just emerging and very interesting. Would love to hear.
Thank you. First of all, a great learning for me from both Dale and Santanu. I mean, these areas that you both have described was really fantastic, and thanks for sharing. What we are doing today really goes back to what we did in the late 90s and early 2000s. You know, in 2001, we launched India's first electric car. It was called the Reva. In 2006, it became the largest selling electric car in the world. The volumes were very, very low then, but it still was the largest selling electric car in the world. And I think through that, where we believed that India as a country truly needed electric mobility in terms of various sustainability factors. But unfortunately, we believe that probably we were too early. And that's what people say. But I just think that we were in the right time, but probably India didn't harvest it at that point of time. But having said that, let me come to what we are doing today in innovation from the learnings that we have done in electric mobility. we understood at that point of time that 87% of India's population is running on shared mobility. And this is fleet systems, whether it's taxis, autos, buses, or even two-wheelers. And only 13% are on personal mobility. And we probably in 2000 went to the area which was personal mobility and not to where 87% of India was really moving. And I think that was our biggest learning in that exercise that we did. So what we're doing today is we are creating an ecosystem that will enable these 87% of the people to move at a cost which is much cheaper, more convenient, right, and pollution free. And that has resulted in our working on creating IP for the last 3 years on what we call smart batteries and swapping infrastructure. What it really means is replicating what people in India or the world over are used to today. And that is when they go to a gas station, they spend 5 to 10 minutes, they fill up their tank and they move out. And they can fill gas to the level they would like to fill. And then they move out from there. What we are trying to create is a similar ecosystem where you sign up for a smart battery, and the smart battery is your energy. You are able to replace it or swap it at a swap station and pay for the energy that you have used, take a new battery and move on. Now, what are the advantages? The advantages is that you don't own the battery, just like you don't own the petrol or the fuel. You only subscribe to it and you use the energy from the battery. This helps the overall cost of the vehicle to go down substantially because more than 60% of your electric vehicle cost is in the battery. Secondly, it takes care of what people see is the biggest concern of range anxiety. How far can we go? When can the machine stop? With the swap station infrastructure that we're building, it's as good as gas stations. So you can go anywhere and swap your battery and move ahead. So it takes care of the high initial cost. It takes care of your range anxiety. And far more than that, it makes it now convenient because you don't have to worry about charging it or anything else. Neither do you have to worry about the technology of the battery because it's agnostic. As the battery technology changes, you'll just subscribe to the new technology. So we started creating an IP around these smart batteries, but built in a lot more into the battery. Where it has GPS, where it has data, where it has smart payment gateways. And so what various companies are developing for their businesses are all built into the battery. So if tomorrow a company, let's say, for example, Dale decides that all the Swiggy deliveries are made in electric vehicles tomorrow, then half of that technology is already built into the vehicle. And if you add on the technology that he's building, like the maps, etc., onto that, you actually have an entire ecosystem to help out, right? And so this is where we are doing today, and we've been doing it for the last 3 years now. We've already installed 20 stations in the country. We've signed up with the largest infrastructure company, which is Indian Oil, and you will soon see swap stations coming up over there and signed up with many OEMs. So our idea is to completely transform the form of shared mobility that exists, whether it's personal mobility or it is deliveries or cargo that is taking place today. Looking at the pandemic situation and the post-pandemic, I think a lot of the e-commerce companies have made commitments, and you know it's out in the open domain. They've made commitments that they would like to have 50, 60, 70,000 electric vehicles delivering to the various consumers. And I think we are part of that revolution that will help and support this as we go ahead. It's also very sustainable, and back to Dale's point that while this is a breakthrough innovation, it's also economically very viable because if you look at certain areas, it's close to 40 to 50% less as a total running or ownership cost of conventional vehicles. So it kind of meets that sweet point for it to supercharge and take over as an ally to the various businesses that are happening. So it's not only the battery, but it's the entire IoT and AI behind that is actually going to power this new concept that we've put in. It's just the start, and we do hope that as time passes, this will be more than well accepted.
Okay. Very impressive, Sandeep. Thank you very much. And you rightly said it. I think ecosystem is the way to go and think. And, I think in India, one thing is we see is very different is there's a big paid forward culture, and it's been mostly on the software side. Now it'll come on, kind of the appliance hardware side. So gentlemen, I think we have a couple of more minutes. So a couple of more questions. I think there's some questions from the audience. So we'll do rapid fire now. Short answers would be great. How does all of this benchmark globally? Some of the things you talked about, your respective businesses working on, how does it benchmark? What can we expect in the next 10 years? Can we be a leader in some of these areas? And, I think the most important point, what are the opportunities for new startups, right? That are trying to go deep in some of these problems. So any panelist want to jump in there?
Well, I can say I always felt that if there was a certain support structure around what we did in 1999, it was the first time that Indian technology was going outside the country. We had more cars running in London than we had in Bangalore at that point of time. And I believed it was a true area for Indian innovation to go not only in India, but to the world. But having lost that opportunity, I think one of the areas where India should look into in a very large way is life sciences. I think what is done in life sciences world over is still in its nascent stage. And India can truly, in my opinion, lead the world over here. Okay. So if there is a sufficient force behind this to ensure this happens, this could be one of the areas that India could do big, besides many other things that my co-panelists would be able to come up with.
Thank you. Dale, quickly, any opinion from you?
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, I'm super excited to hear the progress that Sandeep and the team has made. I think we would probably all benefit from having electric vehicles through the roads, and we talk about pollution and the environmental impact in addition to the social impact. So super excited to see that, and also looking forward to see what comes out of the team there. I think as Sandeep also alluded to, in terms of what we need, I would say the key difference between what's out there in the West and maybe what's in India is at some point our time horizon for being able to see when a certain business gets achieved scale. I think we probably don't have the same amount of deep pockets that maybe a similar company has in the West. And so their time horizon could be a lot more, but they may look at it as a 20-year futuristic plan, and we may have more short-term 4 or 5 year plans. So I think one thing definitely is access to long-term funding. That would be definitely something that would help trigger long-term thinking in entrepreneurs. Now, assuming we got that, and of course, with all the tailwinds we talk about in terms of the talent we have in India, I think there's a huge potential for AI and India to be a world leader in AI. I do think that given some of our core fundamentals, very strong in sciences and math, very strong in, say, English language, and also very, I would say, left brain thinking population full of logical thinkers. I think the combination of sorts gives us that natural advantage we have to be able to be a powerhouse for the world in AI. And I think if we focus on upskilling our population and being able to learn AI and deploy AI, I think the applications of them are immense. Healthcare is one of them, and we talked about financial inclusion. We probably have opportunities to train the world on how to deploy AI at scale, given the learning and the diversity available at India.
Yeah, and I assume across industries, verticals, and so on, right? Yeah. Okay, Shantanu, I'm going to go next to you. Your favorite word. You've created a wonderful sort of tag word, India class problems, and I think Dale talked about low cost, high impact. And all of you talked about rural, semi-urban. I know, Sandeep, you talk a lot about the industrial SME sector. They're the biggest. I mean, SMEs are the biggest driver for our economy in any case. So, Shantanu, how do we solve the monetization problem, the funding, the capital problem, the chicken and egg? Any suggestions there from an ecosystem?
So, I'll tell you, I'll just add with Sandeep and Dale talked about two great areas, life sciences, and then Dale talked about AI. My favorites are beyond those two would be India can be an education hub. Education is going through disruption. Going to US universities and paying $200,000 to get an education is not going to be the model going forward, as much as I love getting my education. But that would be under disruption, and given again our large population, ability to contextualize stuff and create contents, That would be an area. Fourth one, in my opinion, in India, agriculture has to go through a revolution. How that happens, when that happens, don't know, right? But there's an opportunity there. Now, in terms of funding and so on, right? One of the things that I'm a part, capitalist, and I'm a part in academic, right? So one of the things that has changed in the past 4 or 5 years, and this is something I just wanted to bring to the table, the bit late but happening, the technology innovation hubs, right? Our contribution to the research in terms of like practical research in the country used to be minuscule from the educational institutes, but the recent push in technology innovation hubs, IITs, the triple ITs, IISs, and so on, I think is a good beginning. At the end of the day, high risk, low potential for payout, but if the payout is there, it's national. Those things can never be funded by VCs and others, right? It has to be in the US's DARPA or the Chinese equivalent of that. So of late, the government has started pushing that, so that's a good sign. The second thing is that it's a bit of a long-drawn process, right? One of the things that Sandeep talked about initially, the younger generation are now starting to focus on giving something back to the society, right? And therefore, they're not looking for building yet another app that can go do something fancy, right? So a combination of funding from the government and the universities and the collaborative research, VCs who are doing impact funding, and people who are willing to take a longer term bet and not looking for a quick exit. I think those three would be, again, I would use the word ecosystem. Those who start building an ecosystem that may not be obvious in 2-3 years, but my hope is that in the next 10 years, it will be a very different way of looking at the whole, technology innovation.
Thank you very much, Santanu, for highlighting industry academia. That remains the holy grail. So, gentlemen, I think we're running out of time. Thank you for your wonderful, comments and inspiring all of us. This was great fun. I think the next 10 years is certainly, I think India's on a world stage, and we can build innovation here, take it to the world. But I think there's enough opportunity to apply it locally, and especially, outside the top 10% population where we always focus. So, thank you very much, and have a good day. Back to you, Balaji.